Increasing your health span. This is a very topical word at the moment that is about being healthy for as long as we possibly can into older age. And this is something that I'm very passionate to support people to achieve as much as possible. My career in physiotherapy has exposed me to all the things that I really don't want to happen, to be perfectly honest. And not only do I not want them to happen to me, I don't want them to happen to you either. So this is the focus of the work that I do more recently is more around optimizing our capacity to perform as we get older, which is inevitable for all of us. And that in turn contributes to the quality of the lives that we are then ultimately able to lead with our families, with our friends, with our significant others, whatever it is. So what are these things that we need to do? And there are lots of things that we can do. But in my experience and through all of my research, I remain completely committed to the idea, and the evidence supports this as well, that movement is medicine. Movement, there's pretty much not one bit of the body that we can't affect with movement, whether it's the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the muscles, the bones. So movement is something that is my specialty. And so that's the thing that we'll focus on today. The kinds of things that we can do. What should we be doing? The movements that are medicine for the mind and the body. The physical, mental, and biochemical effects of exercise are massive. It's not just about muscles and bones. Important though that is, it's not just about the heart health. We're improving our balance, our mobility, our flexibility, our posture. But the effects of exercise go way beyond that. Way beyond that. So it's mood enhancing. And you might notice that for yourselves. Some things more than others. But mindful movement practices like Pilates, like yoga, where we harness this mind-body connection, really are boosting those mood-enhancing chemicals. And we've got neuroprotective chemicals. One in particular that is stimulated by resistance training is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So they thought for a long time that we couldn't grow new neurons. So we had the ones we were given and we weren't going to get any more. And so look after the ones you've got. Well, that's certainly important, but there is evidence that these neurogenerative chemicals will actually contribute to us being able to regenerate the brain. So resistance training is one of the things that really speaks to that chemical in particular. And so that's why we'll be pulling on rubber bands and throwing around hand weights until the cows come home. We'll be doing that. Exercise and movement also combats the free radicals. So you might have heard of free radicals and antioxidants. Yes, more often in the context of food. So antioxidants, what's one really common antioxidant that we should all probably know? Vitamin C is a very powerful antioxidant that's commonly available in lots of foods. So it's high in concentrations in the likes of red peppers. Oranges is the one that we're familiar with, citrus fruits. And so antioxidants fight the free radicals. It's like Pac-Man, eating off the free radicals. Free radicals are molecules in the body that have an electron missing. And they're called radicals, free radicals, because they're very reactive. And they combine with other molecules in the body and they can create processes that lead to cancer and such like. Because these sort of create reactions in the body and those reactions can go haywire. So we want to mop up the free radicals is what we're saying. And the antioxidants are the way of doing that. And exercise produces antioxidants when we exercise. So it's also got that capacity to mop up the free radicals that we don't want roaming around in the body if we can avoid it. And so it's also combating something called apoptosis. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Try saying that when you've had a few. Apoptosis. Apoptosis is cell death. Sounds a bit grim, doesn't it, so far? Yeah, that wasn't what I had in mind. Apoptosis, cell death. Well, these are just facts, and we've got to embrace the facts, haven't we? So you can probably see it most readily in skin. The fact that our skin cells are constantly regenerating. The fact that we grow new skin to replace old skin, and that's the skin cells have died off, and we've got new skin cells to replace them, and that process is happening everywhere in the body, in every cell in the body. There's this turnover of cells, and as we get older, the turnover is not as efficient. And when cells die, there are leftover byproducts from cell death, and those byproducts are potentially toxic. And so we want to get rid of the byproducts of the cells that have died off. We know that young children heal quickly and the cells are multiplying, they're growing. We get to a point where we stop growing, and then the cell death and the cell birth levels out because we're not growing now. We were growing more, now we're not. And then it kind of goes a little bit on the downs. I did that off the curve. I know. So the cells are dying off more than they're being built, and the toxic byproducts will accumulate in the body. And so the byproducts of cell death or apoptosis are another thing that we want to get rid of. We don't want this build-up of toxic waste from cells. But on the upside, exercise mops up these byproducts. It increases the circulation. And so just by doing that, we're bringing the new building blocks for cells into the body. We are mopping up these byproducts of metabolism, if you like. And we're here today learning all about movement as medicine. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is what sort of dosages, because if movement is medicine, think of pills that you might be prescribed by the doctor, or even vitamins. I mentioned vitamin C already. Some of us might be popping supplements on a daily basis. And there's a recommended dose, isn't there, for your supplements and for your medication. So what's the recommended dose when it comes to movement? And you'll hear lots of different things. Mostly what we are exposed to in the media is what is headline grabbing. So what we're exposed to isn't necessarily representative of everything that could happen. For instance, high intensity interval training. That might be something you've heard of. Is it? Put your hand up if it is. Oh my gosh, yeah, lots of you. Is it something you do? No. No. Yeah, so high intensity interval training. I was really intrigued to discover that high intensity interval training is commonly researched by sports exercise researchers. And the reason is because it's quick, because it's fun for the people who are participating in these studies. But the biggest asset to that research is it's brief. They don't want to research something that takes years. No. They want something where they can run a controlled experiment on a group of people that will be over relatively quickly so they can get the results published. So there's a disproportionate amount of research that goes into high intensity interval training because of that. Now they don't tell us that in the media, do they? No, they tell us we should do high intensity interval training because all the researchers have discovered that this is really good for you, which it is, but it's not the only thing that we should be doing. And this is something that I've been looking into for a long time, so I'm fairly confident that I know what I'm talking about. Strength training. The government guidelines say that we should be doing strength training how often? The answers are all there. Twice a week. And I wouldn't I wouldn't argue with that. But if you were a bodybuilder, you would do more than that. Jack would be in the gym. Well, he would be in the gym every day when he was a student. Now he's got a job. He's planning on 4 times a week. To maintain, he's worked at getting where he's got to, and to maintain it, he'll need to go 4 times a week to keep those muscles. Now, for us, normal humans, I'll include us all in that category, twice a week is adequate for us to be retaining muscle mass, which is really important, and also releasing those wonderful brain-boosting chemicals. Mobility and flexibility training is really also exceedingly important, and that's the kind of stuff that allows us to touch our toes, put our shoes on, reach the top shelf, get your hand up your shoulder blades to scratch your back, bend down to small children and things like this, sit on the ground. Sitting on the ground, it has a big flexibility and mobility requirement, and that's why generally with the passage of time it's something that we no longer do. Also, modern life is driving us a little bit away from existing on the ground, isn't it, with chairs and whatnot. So flexibility and mobility is really important from a functional perspective. And stability and core training, and that's the thing that we do in Pilates. If you want to do stability training, do Pilates. Core training, do Pilates. And the core is really important for reasons that I will expand on later on. Pilates for posture, you won't see that anywhere it's not in the government guidance, it is. You must do Pilates for posture every week, they're not saying that. But posture is crucial for us to function in this upright position. It's important for lung function, it's important for our spinal health. And so posture is important for your health of your neck and the lumbar spine. And also it can even influence the loads that are placed on the knees and the hips and the ankles. So posture is really, for me, very crucial and important for us to work on over time with the passage of time. Cardiovascular endurance, that is getting your heart rate up and doing that 3 times a week for 45 minutes. And then high intensity interval training is next, and that works on something called VO2 max, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. VO2 max is an important measure. It's our ability to utilize oxygen. So how good we are or how efficient we are at utilizing oxygen will influence how physically capable we are, how we can tackle a hill or stairs, and could we do it carrying a weight? If we got high VO2 max or good VO2 max results, then we'd be good at those things. And the reverse is true also. So you might have noticed there's actually more exercise than there is days in the week. So there is a slight flaw in the plan. However, it just means that we've got to be canny and be smart. And that's what I do. I do that for you. So that we can incorporate a lot of these different elements into the hour of the session that you do with me. And if you repeat it on the video another time in the week, then you're cooking on gas. So strength training, there's 4 different types of strength. Absolute strength, that's the total amount of weight you could lift. And that's going to be different from person to person. Whereas relative strength is a calculation that you make based on somebody's body composition. So how heavy you are versus how strong you are is how you work out relative strength. And that's important because it's your ability to move your own body around. And so power is more about explosive strength. So your ability to hop, skip or jump would be a power move. If you were jumping up onto a step or down off a step, that requires muscular power. So it's a speed at which your muscles will contract, contributes to your power. And then the endurance is your ability to repeat that movement over and over and over again. And the benefits of strength training, ultimately, the ultimate perk is it makes you stronger. So, if you haven't worked that out already, the additional benefits include that it optimizes the strength of bone, and the proof is that we have to do resistance training to strengthen bone. It isn't enough just to walk about. Well, it's certainly not going to help your arms, is it? No. Not unless you walk on your hands. It also improves your stability overall and your physical resilience. So the stronger that you are, the stronger your muscles are, the more resilient you would be. Imagine somebody's asked you to help them move house. You know, you're going to last longer through the day, the stronger that you are with helping them lift the bits and bobs. And don't think of strength training as something for just people like Jack in the gym. It's something for everyone. We all stand to benefit. If you were going to perform a strength training routine, you'd be looking at something called sets and reps. So repetitions is the number of repetitions you do, and the sets is how many times you repeat that. So, 10 and 3 lots of 10 is a number that comes about over and over again in the research. And it's quite easy to remember, which is a good thing, isn't it? So if you're thinking of doing muscle building type exercises, you'd be looking at 3 sets of 10 of a particular exercise. It's important to warm up. You don't want to, particularly if you're deciding to challenge yourself. And this is where people who love you're so enthusiastic, you go away and you pick up weights and you start lifting them at home. I'm not looking at anybody in particular. And, you're at risk of hurting yourself if we're not adequately warmed up. A warm-up routine. Dynamic stretching is, you see people whizzing their arms around. Well, that is dynamic stretching. It's not a bad thing to do. To be able to move the joints through space with a bit of pace is really warming up the structures and preparing them for the work that you're going to ask them to do. And it's very important that you get your warm-ups right. And then, of course, you do your exercises and then cool down at the end. And if you're incorporating static stretches, that's the time to do it, when you're warm. So I've put together some suggestions for key exercises that are the important ones to focus on. And so your bicep curls, this is in there really, it's not particularly functional. Well, I say that it is if you're lifting heavy shopping bags out of the boot of the car. Compound movements are more functional. The bicep curl is very isolated. It's strengthening one muscle group, the biceps. But for anybody who wants to have toned arms, you do have to do some bicep curls. The overhead press is a functional movement that strengthens the deltoid, the shoulder, and the arms as a whole. Be mindful when we're doing overhead work. If you've got a restricted movement in your shoulder, invariably, if you didn't overarch your back, you'd be going up here. So to get overhead, people do that, and they arch the back. And so if you never had a back problem, then you're asking for trouble doing that. So seated overhead work helps to prevent that from happening. So it's quite a good way of, one, isolating the movement, so you're not doing everything, and it's more specific, but 2, protecting your back as well. So that's quite important. Squats speak for themselves, strengthen the leg muscles, and it's a compound movement, and it's functional as well. So it's a really good exercise to think of incorporating. So this is a body weight exercise, the single leg bridge. We've gone out to one leg because that's going to be harder and it's going to have more impact if strengthening muscles is what you're looking for. But if you have trouble with a 2-legged bridge, then that would be silly, wouldn't it? So we've got to understand where we are and where we want to get to, and then navigate a path. And that's really what my job is, to support people to navigate this path so that they don't hurt themselves while they're on that journey. And this is just about one of the most difficult movements, the deadlift. We do it in the classes sometimes. You'll have heard me say this is a deadlift. We do it with light weights, so you're less likely to hurt yourself. This picture is demonstrating she's only got a broom handle in actual fact. Because what we need to do before we add load to any movement is to master the movement itself. So, and this is a really surprisingly difficult movement for a lot of people, unless you've been doing it forever. There's lots that can go wrong with it. So mirrors are great tools to help us to know where our body is in space. We don't always know that. And, you know, your body has habits that you're totally unaware of. And so until you start to, you know, when you go in the gym and they're all looking in the mirrors and you think, oh gosh, look at them looking in the mirrors. But in actual fact, the mirrors are a great tool for you to learn what it feels like when you do the movements in the right way. And that's crucial if you want to avoid injury, particularly when you add a load. So this is a bench press. He's laying on a bench, lifting weights above his shoulders. We do this sometimes, don't we, as well? And this is an upright row. That's a bent over row, and it's strengthening the back muscles. The back muscles hold us up. We know they're important for posture and for function. And so push-ups, that's another way of targeting the chest muscles, the pectoral muscles, in the same way that a bench press would. At home, we can do our push-ups. I know you all rush home and think, I'm busting one of those push-ups, don't you? I know you do. So that's some suggestions for things that would constitute strength training. And, you know, you don't have to do a whole load of different exercises. You could do the same ones, repeating them, reps and sets every week, making the weights heavier and heavier and heavier over a period of time. And that's how you would get stronger. And then you would change your program maybe after a few months of doing the same thing. Flexibility and mobility. Flexibility is the ability of a muscle or tendon to lengthen or shorten. But we always think of it as lengthening, really, don't we? Flexibility. It allows for us to share the burden a bit more evenly between all the appropriate structures at a joint. So flexibility is important. If we're not flexible enough to move, then we'll start to move using faulty movement strategies. And so bending down to the ground, if your knees are deciding that they're not keen on bending, then we start to use the back more. And so it's important for us to work on this flexibility element. Mobility is how well you control the movement at a joint through the entire range of motion. So it requires flexibility, but there's also that element of controlling the movement, which we call proprioception. And it relies on all the sensory structures contributing to our ability to move in a predictable manner, in a repeatable manner. If you think about athletes throwing the javelin, they can't get out there and throw it willy-nilly. You know, they do the same movement over and over and over again. And in order for us to be able to work at that high level of predictability, of precision, then we need to have this flexibility, mobility piece nailed down. And by increasing the range of movement at a joint, we'll just be better equipped to handle the stresses and strains of normal everyday life. When you trip over, when the dog pulls you, when somebody calls you from behind and you turn around. But it's about sharing the burden of whatever movements we make, whether they're at home, out in our lives, whether they're in the gym, in the classes that we go to. And it really does make a difference to our performance, just as humans, but if you were to be athletic as well, like cycling, running, swimming, you know, you name it. So there are lots of parallels in the Pilates classes, and my yoga sessions are slightly more demanding when it comes to flexibility. But just a few suggestions or examples. Swinging your leg. This is easily done holding onto the worktop at home. And swinging the leg swings. And so that's a really nice movement that can be used as a warm-up. A lot of the mobility, flexibility exercises actually can be really nice movements to prepare you. And you probably see in the warm-ups that I do, we incorporate some of this stuff. The arm circles, lying on your back, circling the arms. We do it standing as well. That's a lovely combined mobility exercise. Deep squats, something that lots of people would dread. But if you use a table for support, you can have something at the back of you ready to catch you if you are feeling a bit unsteady. Sliding down a wall can be another way of just approaching, bending. This person sitting doing ankle circles. Now, sitting down obviously doesn't take as much of a balance requirement, but if you stood up to do it, then you're killing more than one bird with the same stone there. This is reaching through the door. And shoulder stiffness is something that really creeps up on a lot of us. We're totally unaware of the fact that our shoulder is stiff because of this ability to compensate with the arching of the back. So that if you didn't do that and you stood against a wall and lifted your arm, you might be surprised that it's restricted in the range of movement. So I wouldn't suggest that you go mad and force any of these movements. If you find that there's a deficiency or stiffness, whatever, then it's always about encouraging the movement, nudging the boundaries, is a term that I use, so that we are feeling that there's some tension, some stretching, but we're not pushing past the point of pain into potential for injury. And this one with a towel, it's like football supporter. Yeah, she's like a football supporter there with a towel. And this is shoulder mobility. We do halos, don't we, around the back of your head. We do all sorts of shoulder mobility because shoulders do get stiff. And it's interesting how even just having a stiff joint is a sensation. And that sensation can become painful. Just that stiffness can generate painful sensations. So if you want to stay out of pain, then to be supple is really quite important as well. So she's doing the cat-cow in this picture. You'll be familiar with that spinal mobility. And here she's drying her back with a towel. So we can think about peppering our day with some of these movements. Perhaps you can think, oh, I can stand on one leg while I brush my teeth. When I do that to dry my back, then I'm doing a bit of shoulder mobility. So if we can pepper these things through our day, it doesn't feel quite as onerous. This is threading the needle, which is great for thoracic mobility. Thoracic spine, so that's this bit of us, very commonly becomes stiff, and we're very often unaware of that fact. The rib cage in the thoracic spine houses the lungs. So if the ribs are stiff, then it really doesn't help with our excursion of the lungs. So this is part of our respiratory apparatus, and it's really important to maintain thoracic mobility, but it's also really important from the perspective of the shoulder joint, because thoracic extension contributes to elevating the arm. You can see if I'm rounded in my thorax, I can only go so far with my arm, whereas if I can extend my thorax, then I can go further. So thoracic mobility is really important if you've got shoulder pain or to prevent it, which is really what I would rather you did. This is the butterfly, seated with the soles of the feet together. Now you could sit on a raise if that made it slightly more accessible for you. But hip mobility, all these joints, every joint needs a bit of attention every day in an ideal world. And the more we can fit this into the things that we do, sitting watching TV for 10 minutes, sat on the ground, cross-legged. Once you get, into these habits, people come round to visit you and they might think you're a bit odd. but you won't have stiff hips. I know which I prefer. The hip flexors, particularly if you spend a lot of time sitting when you're working. In your working life, you might be sitting at a desk or driving for a living, and so hip flexors become shortened and tight. And it's important that we give them that opportunity to feel what it's like to be stretched. So stability, the ability of a joint to feel secure while other parts are moving. So this relies on strength and coordination of muscles. So muscles, if they're not used, they will decide not to bother. They'll go on vacation and you'll have a lot of trouble getting them back from that holiday. They like to be on holiday. The stabilizing muscles, particularly of the spine, help to guard against injury. Now, if you've ever experienced a prolonged period of back pain in the past, then those muscles, the deep stabilizing muscles, are the first ones to go on holiday. They're the first ones to give up. They're inhibited by pain. So what that means is that you have pain, the muscles that actually support and compress the spine go on holiday, decide that they're not going to work because of pain. Then other muscles have to take on this role. The other muscles, unfortunately, are not as well designed for that role. So we know that different muscles have different composition. Moving muscles, you can have slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers, and they do what they say on the tin, really. Stabilizing muscles have much more of the slow twitch fibers. They're endurance muscles. They work at a low level over a long period of time. Moving muscles do more like this: on, off, on, off, on, off. So if an on-off muscle is having to do this, it's not designed for that. It doesn't like it. And that's when you'll get pain from spasm and such like, knots in muscles that are painful and you can't seem to get rid of. And that's often because the deep stabilizing muscles have gone on holiday. Now, the problem is that those muscles just forget to come back. Literally, they forget. So we have to remind them. And the only way that we can remind them is with that conscious mind-muscle connection. Being sedentary even, just spending too much time sitting, is something that doesn't require those muscles to do anything, right? Many muscles really, but particularly the stabilizing muscles, because you're stable. And so if we spend too much time being inactive or sedentary, then those muscles also will be tending to have a bit of a holiday. So we need mobility, we need stability in order for us to function optimally. And core stability, there's a lot of evidence, and I've talked about this already. The superficial muscles are your six-pack muscles, and the muscles at your waist called the obliques. You've got anterior and posterior obliques, and they kind of cross over at the waist. And those are superficial muscles. The deep muscles are the transversus abdominis, and that muscle goes from the pubic bone around the iliac crest all the way to the sacrum, and it's around up the spine, around the ribs, and down this fascial line in the front of you. So you can see it's like a corset. It's deep, however. And then you've got multifidus, which is a segmental muscle in the spine, and it goes from the vertebra above to the vertebra below. And it's a bit like herringbone. It's the only segmental muscle in the spine, and it's really very important, multifidus. And that is another core muscle that we target with the movements that the type choreograph. We need those stabilizing muscles because they compress and support. The spinal column, everything's hanging off this spinal column, the shoulder girdle, the pelvic girdle, hanging off the spine. So it's really important for the functioning of the periphery, you know, the legs and the arms, that your spinal column is very stable as it possibly can be. And Pilates speaks to that better than anything else I've come across. And so posture alignment put together with working the stabilizing muscles that optimize the position of the joints so that you are sharing the load between all the different structures that help to prevent pain and problems. So my exercises of choice for stability, the bent leg falling out and the leg sliding. So that is, we're keeping the middle bit still and we're moving the periphery. And we're doing that to trick those muscles of the center, the deep stabilizing muscles, into switching on and doing the job that they're designed to do. So that's when some people come to Pilates classes and think, oh, what's this? It's just a bit pointless. It's all a bit too easy. Now, those of us who've done a lot of Pilates know that even these movements are not easy, not to get right anyway. But it is a shame that some people are put out by thinking that it's not hard enough. They call it low intensity, and even then I would challenge you on that, because the intensity can be as much or as little as you want it to be. It only requires a bit of imagination and some small equipment and your body weight, and you've got it covered pretty much. This is the single leg stretch, and then this is lifting one leg into tabletop. So these are all movements where we talk about keeping the middle bit still and moving the legs. The leg is acting as a load, it's a lever, it's changing the forces, and so it's tricking the center essentially into doing what it should do naturally, the muscles that are around the corset. The single leg circle, she's doing it with the knee bend. And we sometimes do this with the band, don't we? And it's very similar when you lie on your side and do the circles, that the idea is you're trying to be still while your leg is circling. And that requires the stabilizing muscles. And here she's pumping the arms, the hundreds. So there are also key stabilizing muscles in the peripheral joints, and it does seem to be something that they have in common with the spine is that deep stabilizing muscles are inhibited by pain. And that's the same around the hip and the shoulder. And the deep stabilizing muscles don't always come back to work properly after an episode of particularly prolonged pain. And you know, the body finds a workaround essentially is what happens. Your body is so clever. The neural pathways, you can grow new neural pathways, and those pathways become established, and the path of least resistance really now, the new learned behaviors become easier. And so actually to break those habits and return to what was the way that we previously moved becomes harder to do. So your body's always going to take this path of least resistance, and that's why retraining is so difficult. It's much harder to break a habit than it is to make a habit. So the repetitions required are vast in order to break habits and make new habits. It also requires a lot of attention to detail, really, because for us to be able to differentiate what it feels like when the right muscle is working versus how it feels when the muscle that shouldn't be doing it is doing it. So there's a lot of nuances in movement, and that's something that I try and transmit in the way that I teach, for us to understand these subtleties of movement, the refinement, the precision. And for me, this is important. It's not the end of the world if you're not in pain. You know, if you don't have pain, then keep moving, is my advice. But if you have pain, or that you know that there's something that maybe in the past you had a problem with, then this attention to detail becomes so much more relevant and important. And so the idea that if we prepare to move, muscles will actually switch on at the thought of a movement, and it's more likely to be the stabilizing muscles that switch on at that point. So if you think about doing a movement like nodding your chin to your chest, it primes the stabilizing muscle that should do that movement to act. So again, when we're caught off guard, that's often when we're more likely to hurt ourselves because we weren't prepared, quite fully prepared. People have told me, when they come to me with bad backs, I lifted a box at work and I wasn't expecting it to be as heavy as it was. Now, your brain evaluates a load before you get anywhere near it, and it primes what it thinks is the amount of muscular activity that you're going to need to perform that movement. And if you've got a box, it could be empty, it could be full of feathers, or it could be full of nuts and bolts. And you're not going to know that necessarily from looking at the box. So that's when it really is important to evaluate your load. And that's the first thing about moving and handling that we teach people is evaluate your load. Make sure you know, and even kind of give it a little bit of a test before you actually commit to lifting it. And then there's a whole load of other stuff around that, which I won't bore you with. But the fact that your brain makes an assessment and it sends messages to the muscles. And so for us to be prepared to move is another way of, one, guarding against injury, but two, priming the right muscles to work at the right amount, at the right time, in the right way. Yeah? So this is something that I try and incorporate into the movements that we make, and we're more likely to target the stabilizing muscles if we work in that way. So when it comes to the shoulder, the rotator cuff is the stabilizing structure of the shoulder, and there's four muscles. External rotation, and that's that outward movement, is the most vulnerable to deficiency and injury. And so here we're doing a lower movement. It's a very complex movement pattern which involves arms and legs. This is opposite arm and leg, and then she's pulling back. What we would do more commonly is we're in that lunge position, pulling back, aren't we? But this is a normal movement pattern that you might consider in more advanced rehabilitation. And also, for throwing athletes, we need to make it challenging and difficult for athletes. This one, she's pulling back and turning the hands in as she pulls back, so that it's internal rotation on this one. Like I say, external rotation is commonly where most things will go wrong with the posterior cuff muscles. But we want to protect all the muscles, make all the muscles stronger, stabilize the shoulder. So we can challenge the cuff muscles with those movements, and then we can challenge the stabilizing muscles of the scapula with things like the wall push-up. And then the bow and arrow is for acromioclavicular joints, and that's this joint here. So posture, like I say, it's not commonly referred to in the health prescription, but it's really high up on my personal agenda. Putting people back together after injury, it's commonly a fault that I find. Posture is at the root of things. So prevention, it has to be there in prevention if we want to prevent problems. And for our health span to be long and prosperous, then we need to prevent problems as much as we possibly can. And so this iron alignment, it's all about that dispersal of load. So these are some exercises that speak particularly to the posture and alignment of the head and the neck, the diamond, lifting the head away from the diamond, and the dart, where she's extending the thoracic spine against gravity. This is more of a cobra type movement in yoga, where you're again facilitating thoracic extension, which is important from the perspective of the head and neck and the shoulder girdle, the shoulder joint. And then this is arm openings, which is another one that you'll be familiar with. And again, that's all about the thoracic mobility. So if you wanted to be fit and healthy forevermore, then you can do Pilates. No, you must do Pilates. I get Pilates on that. But in addition to that, cardiovascular endurance training part in your vessels, the vessels of the circulatory system. And so Zone 2 training is what you're aiming for. Zone 2 is 65 to 75% of your maximum heart rate. Now that's a calculation you can find online. Or we can use the rate of perceived exertion. This scale is a 1 to 10 scale, and you just think of how you feel when you're doing something. So does it feel really easy, or does it feel so hard that you feel like you might faint? And that's probably number 10. So somewhere in the middle, number 2 is between moderate and vigorous. So it's somewhere in the region of you're walking and you can't really have a conversation anymore. So for us in Lincolnshire, that can be harder to achieve because it's very flat. So we need to sort of see if we can find a hill somewhere, or wear a backpack loaded with books or something. And you're looking at something like 45 minutes 3 times a week. The 10,000 steps a day is bandied about, isn't it? And I like it. I do aim to do 10,000 steps a day if I can. And I feel sad if I don't make it on the odd day when I don't make it. But it is also about intensity, the intensity. If you want to get bigger, stronger muscles, you've got to challenge them. Same thing if you want a fit heart circulatory system, you've got to challenge it. And then this VO2 max was the high intensity interval training. That's the element that is probably most efficient in the average person's life because it's harder to do. It feels harder because it is harder. They're much more in the 8 to 9 out of 10 end of the scale, but it's brief. And that's, like I say, why all the researchers love it, because it doesn't take very long to do. This is the best indicator of cardiorespiratory fitness, the VO2 max. You go to a lab and they put a tube and they make you exercise and they do calculations. And then there's a whole load of charts where you can compare yourself with people of the same age. And it tells you how fit you are or your fitness age. And, lots of people are keen to know all about these numbers. But for me, it's much more about the ability to function and for us to do the things we want to do. But what we know is that this VO2 max is a number that declines over time. And that you can see from this graph, these are figures for the number that would be the VO2 max, and this is age along the bottom. So on this graph, you can see that they all follow a similar trajectory, which is with age. Your VO2 max is declining, and that's normal, what you would expect. But what you notice is the higher up you start, the less far effectively it has to go. So this is a reflection of your ability then to perform. So this is running at 10 miles an hour. This is running at 6 miles an hour. This is walking at 3 miles an hour, a slight incline. And this is walking at 1 mile an hour. So what do we want to be able to do is the question. And if the answer is, I want to be able to walk at 3 miles an hour, then we know that we need to work at having this improved VO2 max. So how do we do that? The answer is through aerobic exercise and your high intensity interval type training. Now the good news is you don't have to do it once a week, and there's quite a nice formula. So you do 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, 4 times. And you've got to obviously warm up and then cool down after that. So what would high intensity look like? It could be walking briskly up a very steep hill, walking down, walking up again, and doing it 4 times. That's what is going to train your cardiovascular system. So a lot of it is trying to keep where we are, but what we have to remember is to stay where we are, we have to do more than we're doing. And that's the crux of the matter. So a weekly retreat, 45 minutes of zone 2 cardiovascular activity. That's just a brisk walk with a chum, just about having a conversation. You've got one lot of those hill walks. Pilates, I like twice a week. If you're thinking strength and mobility, ideally you do it twice a week. And for flexibility, the yoga is just slightly more demanding. So if you felt like you wanted to work more at flexibility, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, don't we? So if you want to work a little bit more at flexibility, then a whole hour of doing that is what I do when I teach yoga. Whereas Pilates, we've got some of it in the warm-up and some of it through the session. And strategies like micro habits, they talk about habit stacking and micro habits. Micro habits is when I said about dry your back after you shower with your towel, you've done your shoulder mobility. You've stacked it with something you're doing anyway, and now you've achieved a bit of, and if you did that as well with your just to make sure you lock the door. So we can then break down something that seems like a mountain that's too big to climb into small chunks of actionable changes that you can take through your day, through every day, and really make it happen. And then celebrate your successes. So at the end of every class, we give ourselves a clap. Celebrating your successes is more likely to consolidate the behaviour. If you feel like, good job you did a good job doing that. I walked up that hill 4 times. I feel shattered. Well done. Give yourself a high five. And please make use of all the information that I share in the newsletter, on the website. There's blogs about all this stuff, most of it for sure. Well, thank you so much. You've got this. And if you're in any doubt, I definitely can help you. Thank you for your attention.